The hospital hallways buzzed with activity, but in one quiet corner of the maternity ward, a newborn lay alone. Nurses passed by, casting sympathetic glances at the tiny baby who had already been abandoned by the world. No one wanted him, not his birth parents, not the families looking to adopt. His medical complications scared them away. His future looked uncertain, until one man stepped forward. Dr. Matthew Carter had seen thousands of newborns in his career, but something about this little boy stopped him in his tracks. Maybe it was the way his tiny fingers curled around his own, or maybe it was the thought of him growing up without love. Whatever it was, Dr. Carter made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He adopted the baby no one else wanted. As the years passed, the boy, named Oliver, flourished under Dr. Carter's care. With a loving home and the best medical attention, he grew into a bright, happy child. His once uncertain future now brimmed with possibilities. He laughed, played, and dreamed just like any other kid. The bond between father and son became unbreakable. But just when life seemed perfect, everything changed. 10 years later, an ordinary afternoon turned into a nightmare. It started with a simple medical test, one that Dr. Carter had ordered just as a routine checkup. But when the results came back, his heart nearly stopped. His hands trembled as he read the papers, his face draining of color. Something was terribly wrong. The child he had raised, loved, and called his son was not who he thought he was. What had he just uncovered, and how could a single test threaten to destroy the life they had built together? What Dr. Carter discovered that day would shake him to his core and lead to a truth he never saw coming. Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. Dr. Carter sat frozen, staring at the test results in his hands. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It didn't add up. Oliver had been a fragile baby when he first adopted him, but over the years he had grown into a healthy, energetic boy. There had never been any signs, no clues that something this shocking could be lurking beneath the surface. With trembling fingers, he flipped through the pages again. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe the lab had mixed up the samples. But deep down, he knew that was just wishful thinking. The name on the report was clear. The DNA markers were undeniable. His son wasn't really his son. The thought sent a cold chill down his spine. Dr. Carter had spent the last 10 years raising Oliver, loving him as his own. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every proud moment, it had all been real. And yet, this piece of paper threatened to rewrite everything he thought he knew. He needed answers. Digging through old files, he found the adoption papers, his hands unsteady as he scanned through them. The documents had been airtight, legally binding, with no reason to doubt their legitimacy. But now, with this discovery, doubt crept into every corner of his mind. Had someone lied to him? Had the hospital hidden something from him all those years ago? Or worse, had Oliver been taken from someone who never stopped searching for him? Dr. Carter's breath quickened as the possibilities swirled in his head. He knew he couldn't ignore this. Whatever the truth was, he owed it to Oliver to find out. But as he reached for his phone to make the first call, something stopped him. A feeling deep in his gut, an unshakable sense that whatever lay ahead would change everything, not just for him, but for Oliver too. And once he uncovered the truth, there would be no going back. Dr. Carter paced the floor, his mind spinning. He had spent a decade building a life with Oliver, pouring every ounce of love he had into raising him. And now, a single test threatened to unravel it all. He needed to be sure. Maybe there was an explanation, something simple he had overlooked. But deep down he knew, this wasn't a mistake. That night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, memories of Oliver's childhood played in his mind. The first time he called him Dad. The way he gripped his hand tightly when he was scared. The birthday parties, the bedtime stories, the moments that made them a family. No matter what the test said, nothing could erase those years. By morning, he had made up his mind. He needed answers. But where would he start? The hospital where Oliver had been left as a baby, the adoption agency. Or was there someone else who had been keeping secrets all along? His first stop was the hospital. He walked through the same hallways where he had first held Oliver, where he had made the decision to adopt him. But now, instead of joy, he felt unease. He approached the records department, flashing his credentials as a doctor to get access to the old files. As the clerk searched for the documents, Dr. Carter's heart pounded. A few minutes later, she handed him a thin folder. He flipped it open, and immediately something felt off. The records were incomplete. Key pages were missing. His stomach twisted. Hospitals didn't just lose paperwork like this, especially adoption records. Someone had either hidden or erased parts of Oliver's history. Who and why? As he stepped outside, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Hesitating for a second, he answered. The distorted voice whispered, "Stop asking questions, Dr. Carter. Leave it alone." The line went dead. A chill ran through him. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. And now he wasn't just searching for answers, he was in danger. Dr. Carter gripped his phone, his breath shallow. The voice on the other end had been clear. This wasn't just about missing documents or a clerical mistake. Someone didn't want him digging deeper, but why? And more importantly, who? His hands shook as he locked his office door. He needed to think. This wasn't just about Oliver anymore. Someone was watching, listening. Someone knew he had found the gaps in the records. His mind raced with possibilities. Had Oliver's birth parents been hiding something? Had the adoption agency covered up a mistake? Or was this something even bigger? He pulled out the old adoption papers again, scanning every detail. His heart skipped a beat when he noticed something he had missed before, a name, faintly stamped at the bottom of the page. Not the name of the hospital, not the adoption agency, but something different. A foundation he had never heard of. The Everton Initiative. He quickly searched for it online, but nothing came up. No official records, no website, no history. It was as if it didn't exist. But why would an unknown organization be involved in Oliver's adoption? Just then, a noise outside his window made him freeze. A shadow moved near his car, lingering just a little too long before vanishing into the darkness. He swallowed hard, his pulse pounding. This was no coincidence. Whoever had called him wasn't bluffing. For the first time since this nightmare began, fear gripped him, not just for himself, but for Oliver. He had to protect him. But from what? From whom? Determined, he made a decision. He wasn't going to stop. He had come too far, and Oliver deserved the truth, but he couldn't do this alone. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and called the only person he could trust. "Detective Harris," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think my son's adoption was part of something much bigger, and I need your help before it's too late." As he spoke, he felt it, the weight of something huge pressing down on him. He was getting closer to the truth, and someone was willing to do anything to keep it buried. Detective Harris listened in silence as Dr. Carter explained everything: Oliver's adoption, the missing records, the anonymous threat, and the mysterious Everton Initiative. When he finished, the detective let out a slow breath. "You were right to call me," Harris finally said. "But I need you to understand something. If you keep pulling at this thread, you may not like what unravels." Dr. Carter tightened his grip on the phone. "I don't care. I need to know the truth. Oliver deserves to know." There was a pause, then the detective said, "Meet me in an hour. And don't tell anyone you're coming." Dr. Carter agreed and hung up. He glanced down the hallway, where Oliver sat on the couch, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. A pang of guilt hit him. He had spent years protecting Oliver from pain, from fear. But now that protection was slipping through his fingers. An hour later, he arrived at the meeting spot, a dimly lit parking lot behind an old diner. Harris was already waiting, arms crossed. Without a word, he handed Dr. Carter a file. "I ran a search on the Everton Initiative," Harris said. "There's no public record of it, but I found something buried in an old database." Dr. Carter opened the file. His eyes widened. It wasn't just an organization, it was a research program, one that had been shut down years ago. "They weren't handling adoptions," Harris continued. "They were running experiments." A cold wave washed over Dr. Carter. "Experiments?" Harris nodded. "Testing. Genetic modifications. They were selecting infants for something, then making them disappear. And here's the kicker. The last known facility linked to them was the same hospital where you adopted Oliver." Dr. Carter's head spun. "Are you saying Oliver was part of this?" "I don't know, but someone does, and they don't want you finding out." Before Dr. Carter could respond, a loud screech of tires made them both turn. A black SUV sped toward them, headlights blinding. Harris shoved him back. "Run." Dr. Carter barely had time to react before the SUV skidded to a stop, and the doors flew open. Dr. Carter barely had time to move before two men in dark suits stepped out of the SUV. Their faces were unreadable, their movements precise. One of them reached into his jacket, and for a brief, terrifying second, Dr. Carter thought this was the end. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a badge. "Dr. Carter, you need to come with us. Now." Harris stepped forward, his hand hovering near his own gun. "And who exactly are you?" The man didn't flinch. "We're the Department of Special Investigations. This is bigger than you realize." Dr. Carter hesitated, his pulse pounding. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." The second agent sighed. "You've uncovered something that was never meant to be found." He glanced at Harris, then back at Carter. The Everton Initiative wasn't just some abandoned research program. It was a classified government project, one designed to create something new. Dr. Carter's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, something new?" The agent hesitated, then said, "Oliver isn't just an ordinary child. He was part of an experiment, one that was supposed to remain secret. But when the program was shut down, certain individuals didn't want the subjects to be disposed of, so they made them disappear." Dr. Carter's knees nearly buckled. "Subjects, you mean?" "Yes," the agent confirmed. "Oliver isn't the only one." A cold realization crept over him. If Oliver wasn't just a normal abandoned baby, then what exactly had been done to him? Harris folded his arms. If this was all classified, why let Oliver live a normal life for 10 years? Why now? The agent exchanged a glance with his partner. Because something changed, he turned back to Dr. Carter. "Oliver is showing signs, abilities that were never supposed to develop. And if the wrong people find him first, he won't be safe." Dr. Carter's breath caught. He thought back to all the times Oliver had healed quickly from scrapes, the way he always seemed to sense things before they happened. He had brushed it off as coincidence. But now he wasn't so sure. The agent stepped closer. "You need to come with us, both of you." Dr. Carter's heart pounded as he thought of Oliver waiting for him at home, completely unaware of the truth. Then, just as he opened his mouth to respond, Harris's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. They found him. Dr. Carter's world spun. Oliver was no longer safe, and the real fight was just beginning. Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, his mind screaming with one thought: Oliver. He had to get to him before they did. Harris was right behind him, barking orders into his phone, calling for backup. The agents shouted for them to stop, but there was no time for explanations. If someone had found Oliver, then everything else, secrets, conspiracies, even the law, didn't matter anymore. The drive home felt endless. Every red light, every slow car in front of them made Dr. Carter's heart pound harder. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. What if he was already too late? What if they had taken Oliver? But as he pulled into his driveway, relief and fear crashed into him all at once. The house was still standing. The door was closed. No signs of a struggle, yet something felt off. He rushed inside, calling Oliver's name. Silence. His stomach twisted. Then, footsteps. A small figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Oliver, rubbing his eyes, confused. "Dad? What's going on?" Dr. Carter exhaled sharply, running up to him and pulling him into a tight embrace. "Are you okay? Did anyone come here?" Oliver frowned. "No, but someone was outside. I saw them through the window. Then they just left." Dr. Carter exchanged a look with Harris. Whoever had come for Oliver had changed their mind. Or worse, they were waiting for something. The agents arrived moments later, scanning the area, making calls. One of them pulled Dr. Carter aside. "We can protect him," he said, "but he won't have a normal life if you stay." Dr. Carter looked at Oliver, who was watching everything with wide eyes, still too young to fully understand. He had spent 10 years giving Oliver a safe, happy life. And now that life was threatened. But as he looked at his son, he knew the choice had already been made. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to hide. No matter what came next, he would protect Oliver. Because that's what a father does.